All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the Simply Trade Roundup. My name's Annik. I'll be your host today, and I have a very special guest with me today that I'm very excited for because I was reading this article recently, and I was like, okay, this is so interesting. Who wrote it? And then I went to the footnotes, and I saw, and I got in contact with someone. Luckily, it is someone from a company that we've had on recently, or maybe a few months back. So it is Peter Schwartz, co-founder and chief science officer at Altana AI. So thank you so much for coming on, Peter. I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks for having me, Annik. It's great to be here.
So you have kind of an interesting story. I kind of want to start with, that we kind of talked previously, and you told me that you studied in France, correct?
I studied in French Switzerland, in Lausanne.
Switzerland.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
FFL, yeah.
So today we're going to talk about an article that was written, I believe, it is 2025. I think it came out in April, correct? Yes. April 30th. Yeah. And it is called Managing Supply and Value Chains in New Era of Global Trade, The Promise of Federated Learning. And so we're kind of going to jump deep in it. But I want to ask, so how did you come up with like AI, or how did you get involved with AI and all those things? Because I feel like it's an interesting thing and it's a very recent thing. So how did you get involved?
Well, I've actually been working with AI and machine learning my entire career. So, it's been more than, I think it's approaching 2 decades at this point.
Really?
So, yeah, obviously AI and the systems have changed dramatically over this period, right? And so, we used to call it more machine learning. I now actually do think AI is appropriate given the capacities of these systems, but obviously like 20 years ago, it wasn't the same state of play. Fundamentally, I grew up in DC, and I was always interested in 2 things, which was one, complex systems and technical things. So, I ended up studying engineering, but also international trade, international relations. And so I ended up doing undergrad and grad school in both engineering, but also, political science, international studies, focused on trade, and also quantitative modeling in both. And so I was very, very lucky to find, supply chain, which is this tremendous combination of those 2 things. You have this whole global system for production of goods, and you need to then understand what's happening and act upon it. And the system involves hundreds of millions of companies. It involves billions of transactions. It involves huge volumes of data. And with AI, you're now able to actually understand those multiple tiers, some of these fundamental questions of supply chain, of production, of economics, of trade, and then act upon it, everything from the shipment level through the company, through the network level, through the production of a good or an entire value chain, or many value chains, or whole nation's value chains. And so that's really been my career, and sort of AI has grown tremendously over this period. And it's been such a pleasure to have these ever increasing capacities to really make, really decision support and actions for all the parties involved in these very complicated systems.
Well, I have to say that right now you're like in it, because we're, experiencing tremendous change in trade. And then we're experiencing tremendous change in AI, which they're both like on the upcoming, right? AI is like really taking over, and trade is kind of getting scattered all around. Like everything is changing, everything is getting rearranged. We're going back and forth. And so I kind of want to bring up what started the article that you guys wrote, and it's globalization 1.0, and kind of starting at the settlement of the Cold War, and then going up to, you're describing it kind of ends at a COVID-19, right? COVID-19, yes. I'm like, is it 2019? It's such a blur. It's such a blur that time.
Exactly. What year is it now? It's like, you're good. Yeah.
I'm like, what? I know. I don't even want to think about it. I feel like I lost 3 years of my life, so I have to take them back, right? We all have to take them back. And especially like, for trade, it's such a change. I mean, this whole globalization period that you guys have mentioned in the article, that is where trade significantly changed. And we can talk about now, which is a whole different story, I believe. But So how did that trigger you with understanding AI, and then you're going through this period of change in international trade, right? And you see those two platforms totally, I don't want to say compete, but they're kind of next to each other. And knowing now, you kind of combined them, right? And said AI is something that we can use to fix this, or to help, to help these changes and whatever. But what made you think about AI in trade?
Absolutely. So, we started this, we're living through two disruptions, as you're saying. Like, one is the fragmentation of the current global order, the end of globalization 1.0. The second is the rise of AI, and the benefits of AI and the positive aspect for everyone listening to this podcast and in supply chains and global production and global trade is the ability to manage complexity at scale in a way that just wasn't feasible before. And, that can be everything from at a company level, where you might have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of parties as a multinational corporation, or a logistics company could be even more, but also at a government level where you might be trying to manage an entire economy. An example of that would be our work around, we were very honored to help create the UK's global supply chain intelligence platform, for example. So as you think about what does this really mean concretely, and how did we end up here? COVID for us was one of the catalysts, but what I would really say is that the high water mark of globalization was really China's entry into the WTO. And this set into play a series of both domestic politics, with the hollowing out of domestic manufacturing in much of the industrialized world, as well as sort of the geopolitics, sort of the international relations aspects that made a fragmentation inevitable. And I don't think we should really overly valorize globalization 1.0. There were lots of problems with it too. We had, you had environmental harm, lots of human rights abuses, a huge amount of fragility that was revealed. Especially like COVID-19 was a great example of that, where you have all these bottlenecks that if you have disease outbreaks, or you have natural catastrophe, or you have, wars, conflicts like Ukraine, or like what's happening in the Middle East right now, very fragile, and everyone had optimized just 1 degree out. So everyone sort of knew their supplier. Like, there's a few exceptions, but there's not a lot. People would know their supplier, but they wouldn't know their supplier's supplier. And so you'd be like, hey, I'm so diversified, but actually everyone got the critical component, the golden screw from one tier back. So what we really thought when we started Altana 7 years ago was we were like, this system will last. Everyone will need a platform. And we want to help everyone go through this transition to a new like a fixed globalization, a globalization 2.0, where the problems in the original globalization are fixed and you have a more compliant, efficient, productive, resilient supply chain. And then we're going to build that platform, and that modern AI will allow us to handle the complexity required at scale to manage that transition.
Invisibility, that's what you say, that's the main crisis.
It's both to understand what to do. You need to both see what's happening, so deal with that invisibility, focus on where you need to focus your attention, because even once you have visibility, if you're a large corporation or a large logistics company, and we're proud to support companies like General Atomics, Arkema, Maersk is a partner we're very proud to have. And sort of, you're talking about huge volumes of data, even after you harmonize it, huge volumes and it's like, don't just show me sort of what's happening. Where is the insight? Where should I spend my time? Whether that's how does an individual shipment need to clear a border? How do you fill out all the relevant documents around, making sure there's not forced labor, HS codes, tariffs paid, all of that, free trade agreements. How do you then understand having a network that's like a resilient production network? How do you buy insurance? How do you then, think about revising that network, sourcing and procurement? I could go on, but that's fundamentally what you're talking about here is seeing is not enough. You need to be able to focus, and you need to be able to act. So focus is how do I triage my day? And that's, both a great usage of AI, a great usage of other types of analysis, just triage the day, get to a set of tasks to do. And then act is things you can do internally, but also collaborating with other parties across the supply chain. And so it's okay, great, I need this document, or I need to we need to actually look at how do I procure insurance for this lack of resiliency, or how do I deal with this bottleneck? And that's not just going to be internal to the company. So those are the 3 steps I would mention: see, focus, act, as you think about how we help, but also in general, how one can structure one's view of what's happening in the global supply chain.
Yeah, and you in the article you talk about federated learning a lot. Actually, it's probably the highlight of the article, I would say. Can you explain that in simple terms, federated learning?
Yeah. So, the fundamental goal we were trying to solve with federated learning was, how do you enable collaboration and cooperation and shared insight without transferring sensitive data and respecting data sovereignty, privacy, and security? And so what we came up with was this structure where every participant gets their own private enclave, and then they can share derived insights, where, you can transmit, you could have shared analytics, shared linkages without ever moving sensitive information like pricing, bill of materials, all of that can stay in situ. And so that solves the conundrum of, how do you actually deal with lack of visibility, lack of coordinated action, the ability to cooperate together, while at the same time not centralizing data or sharing matters that would be very private to a corporation or a government. And so that's fundamentally a federated system where you have these private enclaves able to cooperate in a federated manner without ever moving anything sensitive. It's sort of the same way your cell phone actually trains, like they have the text message train model, but they train on the cell phone, not in another. They don't bring it back to a central hub.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because I think one of the issues is companies not giving up their privacy, right? Right, because they want to share their information, but they obviously don't want to share too much of their information.
Precisely. They want to share specific insights. They don't want to share the sensitive information. They want to have collaboration, but they don't want to be forced to put everything in one place. That's what federation enables.
Okay, now looking at supply chain and looking at global trade, how many businesses are really doing that and being able to share their information, but not their private information, but sharing specific information that the government can use, or that's more transparent for security? Is that used by a lot of businesses already, or is this still on the down low?
No, it's used by many businesses, an increasing number. And I would just really stress that it's not that you're you're just sharing insight or able to collaborate and then have a joint submission that's controlled. This isn't some uncontrolled thing. It's you have a private enclave, and where you need to cooperate, you can then cooperate. And certainly we help many of our clients do that, and you can cooperate across the public and private sector. But again, the federation is so key to preserving that privacy. And you're seeing it take off for that reason, right? You can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah. And then one thing I'm thinking about, so we're also talking about AI here, right? And AI has been a growing factor in all of our lives, I would say, not just trade, personal lives. And there's a few questions that I get a lot, because I see AI a ton in trade. I mean, we, from the classifications to, there's just so many. I can't even think of them right now. Or what is it? Duty drawback, right? So much AI, and people, it seems, are a little bit hesitant on it. They're not sure whether the information will be exposed, whether AI has too much risk. What do you say about that? What would you tell those people?
I'd say it's all the devil's in the details. So it's it's not even that detailed. It's just clearly AI is extremely powerful. And like I said, you have completely novel abilities to act at scale in a way that just wouldn't be feasible before. Think about the volume of what we do. Again, you're processing, hundreds of millions of companies, billions of records, but even at a corporation, you really have a tremendous amount of information internally siloed and externally siloed. So what you're talking about is the ability to unify that, even with the unique identifiers. So it says company A's name in English and it says it in Arabic. And it's how do I put those two together? Same thing for addresses, products. But then it's everything through, you might be assigning tariffs. You might be looking at exposure to forced labor. You might be looking at network bottlenecks, et cetera. And then the main objections to that are often one, data sovereignties, privacy and security. We just talked about that with the federated structure where you bring the AI systems to the client's data in situ rather than transferring all to one spot. Secondly, And so fundamentally, the principle there is just understand the data and the model flows, like as the user, you know what I mean? Understand what's happening. Reliability, where it's like, how do you avoid hallucinations? How do you have a reliable system? And for that, I would say it's really about basing it on a source of truth. So, we have our, you can call it a knowledge graph, you can call it a map of global supply chains. And it's like tying it to that where you always have the underlying evidence where it's like, here's the raw documents, here's why the decision is supported, here's a write-up of why it qualifies for, this tariff, this HS code. Here's an understanding of the connection to forced labor. Here's an understanding of why it would be more efficient. And here's the backing data. Surface to a human where appropriate. They can even interact with the machine learning system in what they call an agentic way, but they have a co-pilot that can assist where appropriate. This then, of course, is this ties to explainability, because the same system that does your reliable systems and justifies itself is also explainable. And then just in terms of understanding sort of what the decisions are at scale, just really measuring that. And I would say that those are some of the main objections and how I would just think about how you actually handle them. And we've found it to be enormously powerful.
Yeah, no.
If done right, like we do it right.
No, I do too. I'm all for AI. I mean, there's a lot of people, that are like AI takes jobs, but AI has to be monitored. So, right? Do you think so?
I totally think so. I think what we're doing in global supply chains is we are dealing in an extremely complicated global system, trying to produce things at scale around the world. It's an insanely complex task. And so what I would say for everyone here is that like the complexity of this task means that even with AI, we have so much work to do. And then the world's also fragmented. It's like, this is a way for us all to work better. And I honestly think about it as analogous to some of the complexity in like medicine or the body, where you have this incredibly complex system with all these different participants. This is like a really fundamentally difficult task that we're all trying to do. And so AI is a real boon, a real help in this. And I really believe that even embracing it, you will still find lots of work for humans.
Yeah, I agree. Even though sometimes it is my therapist, unfortunately. So
that's fine too. Sounds useful.
Right. One thing that is, I think that's the most difficult is right now, and we've seen this obviously happening way before we see it with COVID. There were so many challenging previously, but currently we're in a challenge. Let's just say that where changes are happening, frequently, very frequently. So when I look at AI, I'm like, you have this system and it's helping companies, but what if there's changes happening? How does AI adapt, or how do you adapt it? Because like, I know with forced labor, that's been something that's been coming up, and it's truly kind of left behind right now because of the tariffs. You don't hear about it a lot. And that kind of worries me. We talk about this actually frequently, that no one is talking about AI anymore. I mean, I see you guys, I see Altana posting all the time about forced labor, but no one is actually discussing things. Everyone's just talking about the tariffs, just talking about how they're supplied, like where they can get the things from cheaper, or how they can change their supply chains. How do you manage that with AI,
Yeah. So, as you think about the question of how can AI help if, the present or the future doesn't look like the past, you're saying like, how is it going to be adaptable? I would bring up, and I'll tie it to the specifics of like all the challenges everyone's facing in a second. But, fundamentally basing it on a source of truth is really what's so powerful here. So by having an understanding of the global production, of the global map of the supply chain, which is what we've built, that then allows the AI to be based on that, and you can run different scenarios on top of that source of truth. So if it was just a black box where you just trained it, and then the thing you trained it on didn't look like the future, that would be a real problem. But if instead you're basing it on a evidentiary basis, a source of truth, then it can adapt and you can run the different scenarios, and it's not fragile because you actually can say, okay, now the source of truth looks different, and it operates on top of that source of truth. So it doesn't need to necessarily retrain. You can of course retrain it. And one of the advantages of these systems is they can also adapt very quickly. So for an organization that's trying to manage changes at scale, Also very helpful as long as you have that retraining loop and everything in place. But I would tie it again really to that underlying map, that underlying source of truth, and that ability to collaborate and enabling it as part of that. It's not by itself going to be just the solution. And that's why we do more than just AI, of course. We have this platform, we have these systems to collaborate, we have all of that. Now, in terms of the, like tying it to specific instances, like for forced labor, of course, that's, again, you need the evidentiary basis. So it's tying it to that. And that's, it's, by the way, it's still being enforced by that legislation. And so like just understanding the multiple tiers, being able to have all of the processing and then the production chain, understanding the question of like what goes into what recursively, so that you can then like have the bill of materials for the bill of materials for the bill of materials and see the ties back, or be like, no, actually, cotton doesn't go into this shirt. That's not actually the issue here. Really triaging your day, very powerful. And then the tariffs and all of that. It's just like being able to quickly harmonize and structure it and put it all into the requisite, HS codes, formats, the supporting documentation, all things in which technology and AI assists. So we see a lot of demand for it, in short. I think, but like, I'll just taking a step back. It's like, it's not about AI, not AI. It's about, are you getting the job done? Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I love AI. I love technology. I love machine learning. I also love global trade. I also love having a real impact. Like, the goal here is not to it's not to disrupt or like it's the goal is to fix globalization and to really have a technology that enables that, however you're doing it. And so I don't know that it needs to be visible to the user in all cases, but I'll just say AI is the tool for the job in many of these cases because it's so powerful right now and so helpful.
And how does it help with the government? I mean, there's obviously a lot of government oversight with, CVP and whatnot. How have they been working with AI currently? Or,
Absolutely. So, we work with a variety of governments, and I would really break down how AI can assist across a couple of different spectrums in global trade and global supply chains. One would be sort of protecting national interests, sort of that's like stopping contraband, stopping forced labor, really making sure that you have those resilient, dependable supply chains, preventing supply chain disruptions, and then also promoting economic growth. And so that's actually like trade facilitation, that's understanding how you want your policies to be, how you want your tariff rates to be, all of those things. The first thing that you need is having an understanding of what your economy looks like, and both at the macro and the micro level, like what are the individual transactions coming across the border? What are their value chains, all the way up to understanding it in an aggregate sense, being able to act at any of those levels are like, okay, this is a bad network that's producing something bad. We want to stop that from entering the country. We want to disrupt that. Or you might say like, hey, this is really good. We want to facilitate like the production of vaccines or the production of, medicine or something like that. We want to expedite that. We want to make sure it's not disrupted. And so we're very proud to, it's public that we work, for example, with the US, with CBP and with other departments, UK, a variety of other governments. And really like concretely what's on everyone's minds, of course, is like revenue, tariff enforcement, forced labor, trade dumping, money laundering, and then preventing all the disruptions that you're seeing around the world. And so what that looks like from an AI perspective and from a technology perspective is really about understanding the whole economy at scale at sort of that macro and micro level, and then being able to see where you can maximally focus upon. And then, like, where do I spend my time? What do I inspect? What do I facilitate? What do I promote? What do I help fix bottlenecks on? And then ACT looks like collaboration internally, but also with the private sector, where it's like, how can I actually work with my companies and really like go for the goals that we all share.
And it seems like it's kind of being done already. Oh, and that's security is probably the main thing that the government wants at this point. They want to know what's coming in the country. They want to know where it's made and all the things, right? So they can keep the country secure, as any country would want. But how do you see this moving forward? So AI, I mean, it seems like, I don't know how much forward you can go with AI because you're already doing all of it, I feel like. But where do you see this going?
I think it's just, I'll say two things. One, just ever increased sophistication of both facilitation and enforcement. because those are two flip sides of the same coin. It's like by spending time on the things you want to enforce on, you can facilitate the rest and you can actually have a great experience for both parties. And the second is collaboration. I mean, what we really see is the future of really border management or just in general, government management of supply chains or interaction with that, I should say. It's really being able to interact with the private sector and really move beyond sort of a cat and mouse game where actually with the compliant parties, you're actually saying, hey, like, how do we collaborate? How do we share the documents we need? How do we like actually understand risk together so that like the good stuff moves quickly and you're growing the economy at the same time that you're achieving the government's enforcement goals, and whether that's around revenue or contraband or otherwise.
Yeah. And then, so this episode comes out Monday the 7th. I know there's some chatter that they will get an update coming probably by Wednesday the 9th, because that's when the 10% is supposed to go away. I know you're laughing. It's funny to me too. I want to laugh.
No, I'm not laughing. I know it's concerned. So the way you said it, I'm not making. Yeah.
Because you know what? It seems like this lasted like 10 days, I feel like. I mean, time is flying by. We're already in July, right? I'm so confused on that already. Now the 10% are supposed to go away, right? We're supposed to get an update. First of all, companies are going crazy, I think, right now. I've seen a lot that, you know, I saw this person write something up on LinkedIn, and they said companies are not changing their supply chains because they're thinking that, you know, we're going to settle and it's going to stay low. Tariffs are going to stay low. Tariffs might go away. Who knows? We don't really know what's going to happen. But like, what do you think in this? And I mean, you don't know what's going to happen, obviously, either. Unless you know, please let us know. Unless you do know. But if you do,
I don't. I'm sorry for your listeners. I can give you my hot take, but I
know that. But how would you say companies should be reacting? Or is there a right way to react? Or, you know, how can AI maybe leverage that, you know, taking the risk out of it? Because should you stick with your current supply chain? Should you change it? What, you know, it's going back and forth. What is the best way?
So, you know, even more than just the tariffs, what I would really highlight is that as the global order fragments, you're seeing geopolitics and tariffs and sort of government policy take an ever larger role in supply chains in a way that it didn't, say, a decade ago. And what this means concretely, and then you're just seeing increased turbulence in all the ways we just talked about. And what this means concretely is it's both at the micro level, preparing for different tariff levels, but it's actually having a platform and a set of processes in place where as an organization, you can adapt more quickly. And so you understand your supply chain, you understand what the cost profile and margin erosion would be under different tariff scenarios. You understand your alternatives in the short term where it's like, okay, like here's what we're going to be paying. Here's how we think about what product lines we still do and don't, or do we stop production? Medium term where it's like, might I, rearrange some smaller things so I can qualify for free trade agreements, et cetera. And the longer term, the reengineering of production lines. That is the same type of analysis that you also need to understand around bottlenecks, around the resiliency, around exposure to geopolitical events, to disruptions that might be short, medium, or long term. All of these things are about having a holistic platform and holistic set of processes in place to actually be able to run those different scenarios. So at the executive level, you can understand what it means for the business. Your analysts can go ahead and like run those different scenarios where they can say, okay, what if the tariffs are like this or they're like that? What if, you know, there's more restrictions on rare earth exports, et cetera. And then at the operator level, it's like, okay, great. I need to go through and then like actually qualify for these programs, or I need to assign these different HS codes, or I need to think about rearranging it. So that is, that's really, you know, in a time of deep uncertainty, what I would stress is how we think about sort of the right approach is that to actually be prepared to be very agile. And AI and platforms such as ours are built for that because they give increased ability to like have that loop, that see, focus, act loop, and quickly adapt, act there. And of course, like you can have different scenarios. And like, I'll just say some level of tariffs in our view are going to persist, but the specifics, there's a range of specifics, and it's actually like, how can you be prepared for those different scenarios and then be agile when whatever actually happens.
And you kind of answered my question, because I was going to ask how AI can help with that. So I think you kind of did ask that. You did answer that in the sense that AI is able to help companies, find a better way of streamlining their supply chains and being more secure, and maybe going around the tariffs. I don't know if there's a way to go around tariffs at this moment in time, but I mean, if you're dealing with China right now, I really don't even know what to say, because I talked to a lot of, trade professionals and brokers and whatnot, and they're struggling. They don't really know a way around, because how can you change your supply chain if you're only making money because China is producing your goods?
Yeah, there's in the shorter term, some of those supply chains may become unprofitable. In the medium term, and longer term, I'm very confident that if the demand signal persists, there will be non-Chinese sources of those goods, but it needs to be a persistent demand signal for that to occur. And then as you're going through that transition, again, it's like, how do you handle that uncertainty? How do you have a platform there to rigorously understand it? That's what's needed. But no, I won't sugarcoat it. Like, there's going to be some real disruption as we go through this period.
Yeah, and I'm laughing because so I watched this interview, and it was your interview with it was at Human X, and it was like food from farm to table. I think that was the
that one. Yes. I remember that. Yeah.
And the last question, and I kind of want to talk about this because it's funny. He asked, can AI lower the prices of eggs?
Is it going to immediately lower the prices of eggs? No. But like, as you think about like having an egg supply chain that is actually resilient to disease, sort of all the bird flus, that actually is resilient to disasters that might impact it, that is sourced from multiple locations. So, if egg supplies were cut off as some sort of egg export control that can handle that, yeah, like a rational approach to like actually setting up supply chains and handling production across the multiple tiers is possible with AI. And what you're talking about there is understanding those multiple tiers in a way that hasn't been done before, and then actually having action and being able to run those different scenarios automatically and make recommendations where you work with the human. Absolutely. And so like medium term, longer term, like lowering the price of eggs or goods, just inflation in general. That's what we mean when we talk about a more efficient, resilient system. Like, that's what we're talking about.
I think that's a great outlook of AI. I haven't heard that. We talk about AI in the now. We talk how it helps companies, but we don't really talk about the benefits that might come with it later. That's an interesting take.
I mean, I genuinely believe that. Like, when we talk about globalization 2.0, like, what we're really talking about is using it for those types of purposes. And look, I'm not generally a guy who's like, oh, like you can have your cake and eat it too all the time, right? Like, I'm not trying to be sort of Panglossian or just like say like, oh, things are better than they are. But our experience is that because of how in globalization 1.0, that sort of just-in-time sourcing combined with the intermediation where everything was just knew 1 degree out, there's a lot of inefficiency. There's a lot of intermediation. There's a lot of fragility. And there's a lot of lack of compliance that just doesn't need to be in place. And the same action that allows you to have a compliant supply chain, you paying the right tariffs on, that has the right, UFLPA certificates, that it has the compliance with like a CBAM or EUDR, also allows you to then understand resiliency, or just where you're like have huge costs. And we helped one company save hundreds of millions of dollars in costs just because they identified sort of inefficiencies in that medical supply chain. And so that's like fundamentally what we're talking about here, is the ability to like, by doing the work on one matter in a platform, you solve many of the other matters, or at least advance on them. And so things that look like cost centers actually then advance to become, really benefits.
No, that's incredible. And I mean, for businesses, we're talking about AI being implemented in certain supply chains, whatever. Well, obviously you're going to say yes. If I ask you, would you say the investment is worth it? Yes.
Yes.
But it is a big investment. Like, I mean, I'm not going to say that, you can't just get this huge system that's going to not fix your supply chain. I'm going to say this in like quotation marks. But how can companies, some companies might not be able to invest in these kind of systems, what do they do?
Well, I think that the systems, as you think about sort of the different price points and the different needs, if you're a larger corporation, the ROI or government or, the ROI is very, very clear. Like, we're talking billions saved in disruptions. You're able to get rid of legacy systems. You're able to sort of deal with, sort of all these other problems that you might be facing. In terms of sort of a smaller enterprise, there's still like many solutions and that have like a price point that works, and those solutions are becoming increasingly available. And so, it's a two sides of the same coin. One, those systems can be, they can feel expensive to small, medium enterprise. Two, by doing it, you can leapfrog bigger enterprises and get access to tools and systems that just would not be possible with AI. Where now actually all of a sudden you have a sophisticated sourcing and procurement department. You are actually able to actually understand your resiliency in a way that previously would have taken huge expenditure on consultants, and huge interactions with just like deep sort of human-led mapping, you wouldn't even be able to talk to an insurance company, et cetera, because they wouldn't want to do the analysis. This actually speeds things up. So even for small and medium enterprise, these systems are often worth it.
I agree with you. And I'm thankful you said that, because I see large corporations obviously using these kind of tools, but there's so many businesses currently that are, smaller size or medium size that are failing just because, they have their sourcing from China and whatnot. They're paying, 150% of tariffs. But I kind of want to end on that note. Do you have anything to share with our listeners? Any notes or something that you really want to get off your chest? And maybe you can lead with AI and people that are struggling wanting to use AI because they just think it's too complicated, or people just like different reasons that they share.
Yeah, I'll just say this. There is, you said it at the start, but really AI is a bright spot in a period of disruption for the folks in our field. Global supply chain, again, it's so hard. It is a really complex task, and we're all facing it. You now have systems to manage complexity. And if you're thinking about where to start, of course, there's like purpose-built solutions like ours. There's also sort of like lots of general tools to if you're trying to process some documents that were just unrelated to supply chains in general, just efficiencies. There's lots of efficiencies to be had that are also out there. And really just go try yourself, talk to the various solutions, really just engage with it, and engage with it in a rational manner. It should be very clear to you what value you're getting, and it should be very clear to you how it's helping. And if that can't be explained to you clearly, that's not a problem with you. That's a problem with the solution. So although it can feel overwhelming, I would just sort of go back to the deep expertise that all the listeners of this podcast have and everyone in this field has. It's just what's your pain point? And doesn't solve the pain point. You know what I mean? And it does. If it does, that's great. And if it doesn't, and it can't be explained why, that's not the solution for you. It doesn't need to feel overwhelming if you take that sort of logical perspective.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love your take on AI. I think it's so interesting. I think it's going to help a lot of people, think differently and understand what AI can do for a company. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for kind of going through the steps and going through the article with me, and letting our listeners know, what AI is capable of, and what kind of change it can have in the future. So thank you so much for coming on, Peter. And maybe sometime soon, when we're in globalization 3.0, we can have another discussion, and we'll talk about globalization 2.0 and how it affected us, since we're kind of in the midst of it, I would say, right?
Absolutely. We're very much in that transition. Yeah. And we're all building that new globalization together, that new system. So anyways, thank you for having me, Annik. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.